Okay, I think we're ready to get started here. Welcome everyone to the May 7th Recreation Commission meeting. Sorry, Director Jolicoeur, I see, are you able to hear us on the Zoom? I saw you waving your hand. Okay, thanks. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the lands on which we gather are the unceded territory of the Comox First Nation, the traditional keepers of this land. Before we begin with today's delegation, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the loss of a very important member of the Comox Valley United Soccer Club, Darren McLeod, who passed away suddenly on April 23rd. Darren coached local youth teams for over several decades, served on the CVUSC board in several capacities, and was most recently the club's assistant technical lead. He was a much loved and respected member of the soccer club who generously shared his passion and skill with players and fellow coaches alike, helping shape the Comox Valley Soccer Club over many years. His loss is felt by players, coaches, and families across our community, but his warmth and dedication will live on in the club culture he supported. I know it's been a sad and difficult time for our soccer community, and on behalf of the Recreation Commission, I'd like to express our condolences to Darren's family and friends and to all who had the pleasure of knowing and working with him. And with that, I'd like to move on to our delegation today from the Comox Valley Soccer Club. Could I get a motion for receipt, please? Okay, I think we're ready for you, Stefan. Thanks for joining us on Zoom and accommodating the timeline. I'm just trying to get you up on the screen.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, you're good. Okay. You can go ahead. Thanks.
Thank you for the message, Mel. It's very much appreciated. And thanks for the entire community for the support over the last 2 weeks. It's been very, very difficult. And we got to find a way forward without Darren. On that note, just before I kind of get into the other stuff, our intention is to, with infrastructure projects being completed or started and completed soon, hopefully, we're hoping to name something after Darren at the Vanier complex. We felt it was an appropriate thing to consider, although that can be dealt with at a later time. The two things that we're here for. The first one is the user agreement on the turf. We've had a user agreement for 10 years based on infrastructure investment over a long period of time at the turf. The turf is used like in our competitive season, exhaustively. We have hundreds of kids that use the turf per night. Well over 230 kids who play competitive, plus an active masters program, which has nearly 100 members. Our men's team and our women's teams, who are, there are approximately 50 more members, and our Mid-Island women's team, who has a large roster as well, probably around 20 players. You put that all together, just those aspects alone, there's nearly 400 people using it in the hours without light. We're also pushing lots of community programs onto the turf. Our Valley Youth Soccer League players that are aged U12 and up use the turf, as well as our development program, which is nearly 300 kids now, all under the age of, I would say, 15. It's gotten so big that we've had to move the largest or the oldest segment of our population off the turf, and yet the two time frames on Monday are still chock-a-block full. That we have over 100 kids per block. On the weekends, the turf is used extensively by our club, and our fear is, if we don't aren't able to extend our user agreement, then we're literally not going to have anywhere to put lots of people. I know the RD has promised that we won't lose access, but we've been promised that on other facilities before by other jurisdictions, and it's not worked out in our favor. I know it's just noise, but a lot of other user groups seem to think we have some sort of privileged position, which is not really the case, considering we've invested well over $1 million into the local sports infrastructure, and we're just looking for fairness and equity in terms of access to the turf. The second piece that I'm here to advocate for is linked to this, and it's the funding and building of the second turf field at Vanier. Obviously, we're very disappointed that the last step wasn't finished back in the winter, and doesn't look like we'll get another turf field built this year, which to me is rather tragic because 10, 15 years ago there was a need for two turfs. Lots of other user groups want to get on the second turf. Taxes, be they as they may, looking at the numbers, we're looking at very, very small tax increases to support building of the second turf. In some cases, $25 a year per household, which to me is a rock solid investment for the health and welfare and well-being of our youth. But alas, it did not come to pass. So those are the two things that we're bringing to the table today. We really would appreciate an extension of our user agreement at the turf, and then a commitment from the council to support building of the second turf in short order so that our youth have somewhere to play. Thank you.
Thanks for providing that information, Stefan, and also being here today under such difficult timing for the club. I know there's not a lot of meetings to choose from in the calendar, so thanks for accommodating that and providing your perspective on both the user agreement and not seeing the artificial turf advanced in this financial plan. I'm looking around the room to see if anyone has any questions or comments that they would like to pose to Stefan, but I'm not seeing any. So I will thank you for attending today, Stefan, and we'll discuss the user agreement pretty shortly in the meeting. So you're welcome to stay on the Zoom if you would like to hear the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you.
Oh. Hang on, we do have one comment here from Director Grant.
Yeah, you've got us in a bit of a conundrum here because we have a whole bunch of user groups that want to use the field, and of course you guys are using it all the time already. So my question is, if we were to get on with building you the new turf field that you want, would that mitigate the issue for you, or would that just be a small step towards where we really have to go?
Well, both. So if you build the second turf, I think everybody's going to be happy with it because you're gonna offload the stress on the current turf, and then you're gonna have enough space that I think everyone that wants to get access to it is going to get access to it. The current turf, like full disclosure, if we lose access to it, even if we keep say 75%, it's going to mean we're going to have programs that don't run or teams that don't have anywhere to play. There's just not enough lit facilities in the valley, or at least none that we have access to that we can move them to. We did our part in helping build that turf. Like we've contributed just in cash $600,000. We're moving forward with a field house, which is, between cash and in-kind volunteering is going to be $500,000-$600,000. We're moving forward with it anyway because we know we're still going to use that as a home base. But approving that second turf is vital for our community. I understand there's lots of priorities, but we talk about kids not having getting kids into the right frames of mind and doing the right activities. Well, sports is the best way to do that, and without facilities, it's very difficult to get kids into sports. And off the streets causing problems, right? So yeah, building the second turf would be vital for everyone's interest.
Sorry, I hung up on you and then I came back on. Sorry about that. So a second turf, would that mitigate your issues that you perceive coming in the future, at least for the short term?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know I'm speaking on behalf of my club, but it would mitigate issues for a lot of other organizations as well.
Thanks for that question, Director Grant, and the answer as well. And Director Hillian would also like to say something. One moment. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Stefan, I just wanted to acknowledge that I had the privilege of being at the event for Darren on Saturday night. I want to congratulate you and your members on putting together that event under such difficult circumstances, and say how superb it was to see the example of the leadership that's being developed among the youth in our community, the young people who stepped forward of various ages, the young people who were there. It was, for me, just a sterling example of what this sport and the organization that you've built is doing for the youth of our community. And I think that it was a testimony to what we can do when we give young people the opportunity to come together and play a game that they love with that type of structure. So thanks very much for that.
Yeah, thanks for those comments, Director Hillian and Director Grieve.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your presentation. As a person who's not part of the soccer culture, you referred to, kids having a place to play. So I'm thinking that when we talk about the regular outdoor grass fields, there isn't even enough of them to support kids as well. Is that what you're saying?
The problem is that, we play across the winter and it's dark at 4 o'clock as of, dark too early for us to have viable programming without lit fields. And then the grass obviously becomes unplayable if we're on it too much. So that's why the artificial turf with lights is so valuable, because it enables us in the meat of our season to have a place to play. I did play here, not as a youth, but as a young adult, prior to us having a turf. And it was very, very difficult for the men's team here, who competes in the top division, to sustain a competitive team, because all there was at the time was the gravel pitch, which was very hard on the body, not conducive to good training sessions. Yeah, it gives kids somewhere to play, but it's not conducive to learning the game properly. Or we would see if guys could get off work and train at 4 p.m. When the light was able to allow us to do that, or in gyms, which is a completely different form of the game. So playing on an artificial turf surface with lights is super important. If we look at adjacent communities, Nanaimo specifically, Nanaimo Regional District is, roughly twice our size. They're looking at now 6 turf pitches that are available for their community. Their soccer club is not much bigger than ours. They've got 2,200 members. We've got 15 to 1,600. And they have just the Nanaimo United Football Club has access to 5 different turf pitches. We've got 1. And then we're looking down the barrel of losing access to some portion of that 1. So I don't know how much more clearly I can spell it out, but we already as a community do not have enough of these facilities. We need at least 1 more immediately. And right now only 1 other club really uses it, and that's field hockey, and it's very small amounts. So for all these other clubs that want to use it, it's very difficult. They'd have to take access away from us, and we are the largest user, and we've invested by far the most into local sports infrastructure. So that's why all of this is so difficult.
Well, it would seem to me that a facility of this quality would be mostly for advanced players.
No, that's not the case at all. We would put our youth, our grassroots players on the turf in the bad weather seasons. We just don't have enough room.
Yeah, well, I'm just
And
thinking,
we don't have like high performance teams in the valley to begin with. We have a second tier teams here, which is a competitive vehicle, but the closest high performance team is in Nanaimo. So that is not accurate that recreational grassroots players wouldn't get access to it. They do already.
well, I know that Director Arbor's not here, but he would probably put forward the fact that, you know, having more grass fields that would take a lot of the pressure off, especially when you're talking about the younger players. I mean, it's nice to be able to put them up there, but I see it basically as akin to, you know, taking your driver's test on a Ferrari. If you get the basics down right, I mean, more localized fields, it does make a lot of sense. But you know, like I say, I'm not part of the culture. I can, one other question, if I may, though, is who actually does the scheduling around this field? Is it the Comox Valley Rec Commission itself, or do you guys have a hand in that?
Well, we have there's a user group, working group. So that's the RD, the SD, and then users. Right now, there's going to be this new strategy for divvying up the field allocations all across the valley. So that's going to happen in the next year or so. So what comes of that will become the new scheduling policy for not just the turf field, but also you know, all the grass fields. And regarding your comment about the grass fields, yeah, definitely we need more grass fields. But again, it's not, like, to be honest, the highest level players in the world demand to play on grass. They don't want to play on turf. The turf is valuable because of the climate that we're in and the volume of players that we have here. It has nothing to do with the ability level of the players. There is an aspect for some kids that, you know, or sorry, for kids in certain times of the year, that if you have, you know, if you got 6, 7, 8-year-olds and it's pouring rain, it's better for them to be on the turf because it's not as soggy. If they fall, they don't get as wet. These sorts of aspects. But the notion that this is only for high level players is completely inaccurate. I don't know where that came from. I don't know who made that up, but it's frankly misinformative for the public, and it has nothing to do with the need for a second turf field.
I have just one more. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. So, looking forward then, would you consider it maybe the best policy for the board just to delay this for a year or two until we know where we're at with the second field? Would that be something that give everybody a chance to regroup and move forward from there?
Like the user agreement?
Yeah. Like
Well,
they're asking
yeah,
for 10 years, and I can see that being problematic, but would it be possible maybe to ask the board for a couple more years just to regroup and see if we can move forward with the second field?
Yeah, I mean, anything would help, to be honest, because you know, looking at no second field and losing access to this field, like we're going to be in a big, it's going to be a big problem space for us and to the point where some programs would have to get canceled, which is, it's not good for the kids to begin with, and then it would be like a revenue issue for our club as well. So it's not just which would become an operational issue for our club. So there'd be a cascading effect with that happening. The double entendre of, or the double blow of losing access and no second field.
Thanks for that answer. And I think there's probably some context that staff can provide to the board and elaborate on what Director Grieve was asking when we move into the staff report part of the meeting. And I don't see any other lights on, so we'll dispense with receipt and move on with the agenda. Thanks again, Stefan.
Thank you.
We did get a motion for receipt, so any opposed to receipt? Seeing none, that's carried. And moving on to the resolution status report, could I get a motion for receipt, please? Moved by Grant, seconded by Morin. Any discussion on the report? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Anyone opposed to receipt? And that's carried. And moving into our reports, we have what we've been discussing, the Comox Valley United Soccer Artificial Turf Field Agreement. Moved by Greed, seconded by Hillian, and I'll pass this over to staff.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Trish Morgan, our Assistant Senior Manager of Recreation Services, will be introducing the staff report, and then you've got a few different staff here at the table that can help with the discussion. So Trish, over to you.
Great, thank you. I'll just wait for it to come up. Excellent, there we go. So let's make sure I got the right buttons. There we go. Stefan kind of went through a little bit of this in his presentation, but back in 2014, the CVRD, Comox Valley Schools, and Comox Valley United Soccer entered into a 10-year agreement, and that was when the artificial turf field that currently exists was built. The agreement now expires on August 31st, 2024. And as you saw in the staff report, we're currently recommending not renewing that agreement for a further 10 years. In short, the agreement provided CVUSC with priority booking rights and the waiver of user fees over that 10-year period. And as Stefan noted, they provided a significant capital contribution of $400,000 to the project. And it's my understanding the project cost approximately $1.8 million. As he also noted, and we put in the staff report too, CVUSC has really maximized the use of the field. There's often more than one team on that field for practice times. It's not uncommon to see up to 6 teams practicing there. However, if it is renewed for a further 10 years, they will continue to receive that priority booking rights, and they'll continue to receive the waiver of fees. And in turn, the CVRD, we will receive $125,000 towards the capital renewal of the turf. For this reason, staff are recommending that the capital contribution agreement not be renewed for an additional 10 years, and that the allocation of the artificial turf field be grounded in clear standards of play to support fair, transparent, and equitable access for all user groups, prioritized on youth club participation numbers. And this supports the Comox Valley Regional District's strategic driver of accessibility, diversity, equity, and inclusion. This recommendation also aligns with the recommendations in the sport field strategy, such as shifting the allocations away from historically based practices to those that consider equity and development of best practices, like the Sport for Life and long-term athlete development models. Recognition that historical allocations and booking practices are embedded in equality, and requirement for sport groups to align with their national sport organizations' long-term athlete development models. The rationale for our recommendation is that we will be starting work as a region on a regional sports field allocation policy. And the goal of that is to develop an allocation policy that's fair and transparent and ensures that equitable access to sport fields for all sport groups, rather than based on historical booking practices or agreements. Also, with community growth, we're experiencing more demand for use on the artificial turf field from other user groups, and seasons are extending longer into the rainy months of the year and the time of year where the light goes away much earlier. So as Stefan noted, having practices at 6 p.m. in December are just not viable unless there is lighting. In terms of equity, we want to ensure the equitable application of user fees for all users of the field. And finally, based on the reserve contributions in our 5-year financial plan, CVRD will have approximately $5.2 million in reserves at the end of 2028. The turf that is in place right now is expected to cost about $1 million to replace, with about 50% of that coming from Comox Valley Schools. And now, in terms of that, we're looking at just replacing the turf and possibly the shock pad. If the contribution agreement is not renewed, then CVUSC will be allocated time on the turf field in alignment with the field allocation policy, like all other sport groups. They will continue to receive a significant allocation of time on the artificial turf field due to their large membership numbers. However, other organizations will also have opportunities to use the field in the future as well. And that's all we have for now. Are there any questions?
Thanks for the presentation and providing the context for the report. I believe we have Director Grant up first. Go ahead.
Yeah, can you tell me how many other user groups would be wanting to use this field? Stefan said one, but I know that there's more than that. I know lacrosse, for example, would like to use it, and I think football and a few others, so.
Certainly, through the chair to the director, it is our understanding when we met with user groups last September that lacrosse was one of them. Field hockey right now gets 1.25 hours per week. Baseball would like to be able to continue to practice, even if it's not on a full baseball field, they can still do skill development in, the shoulder time of their season. Who else did we have in there? Football also getting some extra practice time in there as well.
So how much time would the soccer guys lose out of what they're already using if we were to open it up to everybody? I'm just trying to get the magnitude of what we're talking about here.
Certainly through to the director, we don't know that yet because we haven't started that allocation process to determine what their needs are. Right. So it is a good question and it's not yet able to be answered. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for that. And Director Morin up next.
Great, thank you, Chair. Yeah, my question was the same as Director Grant's. So thanks for that. But I also read in the report the school district would like, are they currently using the turf very, very much at all? Or do you have a sense of how much they would like to use it?
Through the chair, the director. So what they're planning on doing is going back to their athletic programs. And right now they have the field booked all throughout the school day until I believe 5 o'clock, 5:30. And then at that time it becomes community use. So they've talked about going back to their athletic programs, finding out specifically, do we need it until 5:30 or is it just sitting there empty? And working with the user groups so to free up some extra time. And so they've talked about a desire to have some other groups maybe use some of that time in that time between say 3 o'clock and 5:30. So
there's a possibility that if the school district freed up some of that daytime, like the masters or someone, people who are maybe not working or whatever could go in that slot. Is that kind of the idea?
Or perhaps maybe lacrosse could get into that slot or another youth group. They've indicated that they're more interested in seeing youth use that slot.
Yeah, which is difficult during a school day.
Yeah, so it would be after the school day, but of course, coaches and that sort of thing.
Right.
So.
Okay, I thought you were talking about it sits empty. It might not be utilized during up until 5:30.
It's utilized throughout the school day, but it's between 3 and 5:30.
3 and 5:30.
Depending on their own athletic programs, their extracurricular athletic programs.
Thank you.
Thanks for that question, Director Kerr.
Thanks, and thanks for the report. I found it interesting that back in 2008, the sports field inventory, 2 fields were recommended. So already we were behind the 8 ball in 2008, and then compared to the Nanaimo example of 6, we're obviously the demand is there, and soccer is the #1 played sport. And I also really do appreciate the comments linking to our strategic plan around inclusion and equity and fairness. So I think this is a really interesting discussion. I took this issue on a run with me this morning and really thought about it because there's a lot of nuanced thought that needs to go into this. I think the big issue here is, we do need that second field in the short-term future, and that really changes the nature of the user agreement. So I was wondering, maybe question to staff, I'd be in favor of like a 1 or 2 year extension to the user agreement, allowing us the time to hopefully build a second field, in which case, a more open user agreement, or not a for sure amount of time for any one club would make sense. I mean, 80% of 2 fields is a lot more than 95% of 1 field. So question to staff, has a 1 or 2 year option been explored, just an extension? And while we explore the option of building a second field, thanks.
Certainly through the chair to the director, that is a possibility. Right now, the artificial turf field is, as you know, is on the back burner until the decarbonization plan is brought forward, which will be today. And then from there, we're looking at creating a new capital plan. So we could explore a 1 to 2 year agreement while the Recreation Commission looks at all of those projects together in their entirety to determine the timing of a new artificial turf field.
Thank you.
Thanks for that question. Director Brown.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to, I really appreciate the equity lens that this is looking at and not giving preferential treatment, although preferential treatment was due given their contribution to the capital upgrades. But I think there's a bit of an unfair advantage with this. So we just had a presentation, a delegation from the soccer group, but there are a whole long list of other users that probably would like to have a conversation with us right before we make this decision as well. And they're not here to have that opportunity. So just thinking about that advantage that the soccer group has.
Yeah, thanks for that comment. And we'll go to Director Jolicoeur online.
Thanks, Chair. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I really appreciate the work that staff have done to really explicitly tie in the work that the Commission has done to make clear our priorities and how the artificial turf fits into our strategic plan for the Commission. And I'm generally in favor of the recommendations that staff are presenting today. I would be curious to know what the impacts of maybe a 1 year extension, and why I say 1 year rather than Director Kerr's potential 2 year is because we know that the City of Courtenay is leading the sports field allocation policy, which will include a lot of what staff have explicitly mentioned in the staff report around one of our drivers for the Commission. And so I wouldn't want to commit the Commission into a long-term agreement when we have an entire policy process underway that will be building on the sports field study that the Commission received last year to inform our strategic plan. And that study, I refer to it in reading today's agenda because there's a lot of really great nuggets in there around the different user groups, the actual hours and the requirements that they need for the sports that they support in the community. And so I think that that's something that I look forward to seeing how the sports field allocation policy that will be developed really builds on, because I think it's a great baseline for us to understand where our community is growing and the needs. I do have one specific question that's in the staff report in the second recommendation that speaks to the strategic driver. And I was curious because I did go back into some of our notes from our strategic planning process around equity in that last driver. And I believe it says somewhere here in that second be it resolved statement in the third line, prioritization on youth club participation numbers. And I'm wondering if staff can speak to why, we speak around all users and we speak to access for community members across the lifespan, but then we also explicitly mention youth club participation. So I'm wondering if staff can speak to why that was pulled out specifically.
Through the chair to the director. So generally allocation policies start with prioritization for your own programs, and then they go to youth groups before they go to adults. And that's just basically it's a best practice. So it's not that adults, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought. And so I guess my curiosity was if we pass the second part of the motion that we are predisposed, for me, it feels like we're pre-deciding on an outcome of the sports field allocation policy that directs it to prioritize youth. And I guess I'm curious why the commission would want to suggest that youth be prioritized when we haven't actually gone through that sports field allocation policy process yet.
I think Doug DeMarzo, our General Manager of Community Services, would like to weigh in on the, I think that specific reference to the youth club participation.
Yeah, just to further Tricia's comments, I think it's important to recognize that youth have limited hours of time available after school hours. So the focus on youth is really about those prime time hours. And that's inherent in just medical sleep patterns, that children need more sleep hours, they have different responsibilities and family values. Where, as you may remember, there was a time when our arenas and still are busy till past midnight. I think if we continue to allocate an artificial turf field for the adults from 9 p.m. till 3 in the morning, if people want to sign up, I don't think there's as much pressure there. Of course, that's being a little ridiculous, but there are places that do have entertainment leagues in larger cities that do play much further into the evening hours, both in hockey and in soccer. So it's really about understanding the importance of our youth and their health and how that relates to a prioritization here.
Thanks for that. And yeah, given that it is a best practice, I think it's a safe assumption that that is also going to come out of the policy work. It wouldn't be a different framework than what's considered best practice already, I would think. And I'll pass it to Director Morin.
Great, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I would like to see maybe what's been suggested, a little bit of a short-term maybe agreement just to get us through to hopefully revisiting a shorter timeline for the other turf field. And I guess I'm wondering, I mean, the report does talk about, you know, consulting with others in the National Sport Organization's long-term development model and you know, actually looking at those best practices, and that this is kind of the theme or the direction going forward in sport. So I guess I'm also curious about the conversations that happen with our user groups around that that driver accessibility, diversity, equity, and inclusion, in terms of how, I mean, we obviously can't dictate what groups are doing, but is there ever any broader discussion around how to embed more of that in their programming or their own direction that creates more alignment with our policies? And I guess I'll let you answer that, but I guess, I mean, if we did have the extra field, we would still have that policy. It would just obviously make it much easier to, you know, we'd have all that extra space, so it wouldn't be as much of a, as much pressure. So yeah, I'm just curious about what kind of work is done with our user groups around that strategic driver, if any.
All right. Through the chair to the director, and Doug might jump in at some point here. I haven't worked with many of the user groups much since starting last June, so I'm not aware of that, but definitely the pressure would be released with that artificial turf field. And it could be something that we could move forward with as we look at also field improvements and amenities planning. So looking at, you know, what kind of things can be done to make the fields that exist in the existing field more accessible, so they can expand that programming. And I do know the city of Courtenay, they do quite a bit of inclusive and accessible programming as well. And when I talked to staff about the potential of the new artificial turf field, they had a lot of ideas going in their brain about different programs that they could offer. So
I just have a quick follow-up, Chair. Because I think part of the point of this driver is that we don't know who's out there. I mean, as an example, we have an unhoused group soccer team. They're not folks that necessarily can organize in the capacity that a more established user group can, or has the ability to raise the kind of funds. And that's not to minimize the huge impact, the benefit that we've had. But that's just one example. There may be also First Nations groups or others that we're trying to, literally level the playing field for. And we don't know who's out there because they're not at the table yet. So I don't want to, I think we need to keep the focus on that, and it is identified as best practice as well. But I also think having an extension to the agreement would be helpful until hopefully we can get to that point of that extra feel. Thanks.
Thanks for those comments. I'll pass it to Director Grant.
Thank you. So I can't remember exactly where we left this turf field thing while we were doing our budget, but I don't think we've ever actually stated that we want to build a turf field. I think it's been in the back of everyone's mind, but I don't think we've ever said, let's do it. So I think we need to do that first. And then once we actually know we're going to do it, we can get a timeline on when it could be built. And then we would know how long to extend the soccer agreement for, because Stefan himself said that once the other turf field is built, it would alleviate most of this issue. And so I think we actually have to sit down and decide that's what we want to do. It sounds like we all want to do it, but I don't think we've ever formally done that. And so to figure out how long you want to give the renewal for, you need to know when you're going to be ready to go with the new field, I think.
I'm a little bit confused by your statement that we've not said that we wanted to do it. I guess I'm looking to staff for some context on that.
Sure, I can start, and then Doug or Trish or Jennifer, please jump in. This is the Recreation Commission strategic plan that we are talking about, and the commission did determine a strategic plan which had a three-phase components to it. The first being the artificial turf and priority for that. Second being consideration for additional ice surfaces, and then thirdly the pool and aquatic services in the valley. And so the turf was the first priority coming out of the strategic planning process. And that's the conversation that was held over the fall and at the beginning of this financial planning process early on. We are in a pause mode, I guess, waiting for the decarbonization strategy, understanding that broader impact, and then the commission would be revisiting its priorities around the strategic plan, which would include the turf as a project.
I guess my point is we need a timeline for when we're going to do this so that we can figure out how long the soccer club would need to extend their agreement for. So I don't think we have that yet. So I think that's where we need to go with this first.
I'm in agreement. I think the sooner that we can make a commitment on moving forward with artificial turf, the better off all of our user groups will be who are wanting access to these facilities. Director Grieve.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. My recollection on that situation was the fact that we were in the middle of budget, and some of the directors were pushing to go to short-term borrowing, which did not require public assent. But in order to do that, we needed a unanimous vote at the board, which we did not get. By the time we got the budget and realized how much it was going to cost everybody, it was past the deadline of being able to get it on board for this budget season. Now, my question is basically around reference to the decarbonization and the artificial turf. My question is, are artificial turf fields all virgin plastic, or they don't use recycled plastic in there? And the truth be known, at the end of the day, wouldn't all those little soccer players bouncing around be producing a lot of carbon dioxide?
Did you want staff to answer that?
Well, the first part.
Okay. Go ahead.
Through the chair to the director. So based on the discussion back in February, I think some directors were cautious about approving the artificial turf field until they saw what the cost of the decarbonization strategy would be. So it wasn't necessarily that the artificial turf field leads to decarbonization. It was that they were concerned about the capital costs of both. So they wanted to look at everything in context of each other.
But it does use recycled products to answer your question. Yes, yeah. Sorry, I'll turn on your mic. One sec, Director Green. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
so that would mitigate some of the effects. Question to the staff then would be, in light of the desire to move forward with a new soccer pitch, which I think may not be unanimous. We may have to go to public assent, but if it were unanimous and we wanted to bring it forward, we'd have to put it into the 2025 budget, right? But we do have some money set aside. I understand. Well, we got the COVID grants there, and we put 800,000, I think, or 700,000 aside for this project. What would be? We could start with some preliminary design stuff. We could get moving on it. Should this board decide to move forward on this, would you give us a timeline that we could take to the United Soccer Association to give them an idea how long they're going to have to we're going to have to wait before we can get the second pitch and accommodate all the other maybe user groups?
At this time, with regards to the design, I think staff have advanced the design with our consultants as far as we're comfortable taking it. We're nearing 70% completion, and we have some decision factors that need to be made before we advance any further due to the risks of continuing to pay the consultants and potential change in both products and other types of shifting of the sports field. So not to get tied up in the sports field too much here, but you were presented a design that both accommodated some of the needs of baseball and soccer at a cost of, sorry, Trish.
Certainly 5.7 million at the time of the Class D estimate, yes.
And I would just maybe to come back to this particular staff report and the user agreement that is at the root of the staff report. I understand there may be some interest in extension, short-term, 1, 2, some number of year extension. And I think if the direction from the commission was to pursue that on a proportional cost contribution basis from the soccer club, then certainly we could entertain that, work through that. And then these other pieces around the turf, the decarbonization strategy, there's a lot of information with that. I wouldn't want to get too focused in on that detail without having more context for you today. But the purpose of today's report is really about that user agreement. And I think there is value if the commission supports moving on a 1 or 2 year extension, that you give us that direction and then we can carry forward.
Thanks for that context and refocusing the discussion here. I'm going to pass it to Director Brown, and I think that's the last question and comment we'll have on it before we move to the recommendation.
Thanks, Chair. Just the fact that we're considering extending this is making me uncomfortable. The soccer club, with good reason, a huge membership, a huge investment in our rec facilities, very much appreciated. Having said that, they have had 10 years of a privileged position, and we have no idea of the number of people that have been waiting for those 10 years to get access to that field that can't get access because the soccer clubs are using it. And I suspect that extending it for 2 years is just going to exacerbate that inequity.
Thanks for those comments. And I have Director Jolicoeur. I'll give you the last word on this.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I guess I'll focus my question on the first recommended resolution here. How do staff see, and we heard from the delegation, a curiosity around what the impact of passing this would be, given that we're in this 1 year limbo with the new policy that will be developed. How do staff see the allocation of field, if this passes as recommended between now and when the policy is implemented? And if there's any estimation on potential impacts on the soccer club?
Through the chair to the director. So if we were to enter into a 1-year extension with using basically the same terms of the current agreement, then their allocation would continue exactly as it is, and other groups wouldn't have access, or they'd have very, very little access until the end of that term and until such time that the allocation policy comes in. And of course, we could weave into that agreement that that the contribution or the user agreement stays in place until the allocation agreement policy comes into force. But we would have
to be clear, I'm asking if the recommendation that was recommended passes, so that we do not renew, what would be the impact, and how would you see the allocation?
We would have to sit down with the city of Courtney and talk about that, because they are the drivers in that allocation policy development. But I think there's some things that we could pull together in the short term to determine, or to, in the interim, identify a different allocation method than simply priority booking rates. And that may have to be a short-term pilot, for instance, until the policy comes into play.
Okay, we did say that would be the last comment on that. So I'm going to dispense with receipt. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, that's carried. So we need to move on to the recommendation, and there's been a lot of discussion about an alternative, and I'll go to Director Hillian.
Thanks, Chair. I move that the capital contribution agreement with Comox Valley United Soccer Club and Comox Valley Schools for use of the artificial turf field be renewed for a 2-year period.
And did you want to speak to that at all, or? I think you're 16. I got it right.
Yeah, thanks. You know, the reality is that we're talking about the group with the largest participation numbers in the community. I would argue that it's probably the most accessible in terms of sports that kids can play. I appreciate that there are other groups that would like to get more access to playing fields. Currently, they're not doing that, so they're making do elsewhere. But I think to penalize the group that is the largest participatory organization in the community, who actually were the driving force behind getting this facility constructed in the first place, would be unfair. And I think it makes more sense to renew the current agreement to get the second field built, and then the issue sorts itself out. Thanks.
Thanks for those comments, Director Kerr.
Yeah, I support this motion. Again, big thoughts toward equity and inclusion, and that's the point of the second field, to have more user groups and a design, the DiMarzo design, as I'm going to refer to it, with the baseball field included, and flexible field space. Like, that is something we need to do. So in the meantime, to recognize this club's capital funds that went towards this, and to not impact any of the current program until we have the second field built. I think this is a great middle term step. And I also agree with the comments that Director Jolicoeur mentioned about that 1-year field study. But I think we're not going to have that second field built in a year. It's going to be some planning and timelines and construction. So we're at least 18 months out. So the 2-year extension covers that. So we won't be having the same discussion next year. I would say, though, I would love to bring the actual timeline discussion about the turf field back to this rec commission ASAP, perhaps at the next meeting. So we can just talk about, are we okay with the design? Are we happy with the timelines? What are the timelines? And how are we going to fund it? Thanks.
Thanks for those comments. Director Morin.
Great, thanks, Chair. Well, I'm not going to vote against the motion, but I do want to make a couple comments about our accessibility, diversity, and equity inclusion lens. And I believe I'm pretty sure I was the one that brought it forward for the ice allocation to have more equity in ice allocation. And so I feel like I need to speak to this, because if I'm voting in favor of this motion, it makes it sound like I'm not in favor of continuing that practice. I do think that there are people we have groups that it is much easier to get to the place of being able to be in a position to be first in line. And again, that doesn't minimize the contributions of the user group. In the case of ice allocation, I don't want to retread everything. There were some growing sports who didn't have allocation. That's not necessarily the case here. We have lots of people using the field for soccer, but there could be someone out there that's not getting an opportunity. And so I don't want us to put aside this policy. I'm hopeful that the user groups will really consider accessibility, diversity, equity, inclusion in their programming. And we know there's a large youth population that play soccer, which is great. But I think that it's not necessarily fair to say that other groups haven't come to the table respectfully when there is a barrier to people even getting to the table. And it doesn't mean that there aren't people out there. And I think that that's important to note. And I think that that's what this policy that we all agreed on is about recognizing that there are groups, that there are people in the community that don't even have the ability to get there. So I'm not going to vote against it. I do think that we need some time. And I agree that we need to look at other things that we've discussed today, but I just want to really reiterate those comments. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for those comments, Director Morin. And I'll go to you in one moment, Director Jolicoeur. I think you're we've got two lights on left in the room. I did have a question for staff around extending this, because it seems as though there's two components. There's one, the access to the facility, which I do think that the timing of this agreement expiring in conjunction with delaying the second artificial turf field, which was an initiative that was brought to the board by the soccer club and was part of how that project began its advancement, even though we've kind of reached a bit of a standstill with it. But to then delay the project and simultaneously remove access in the same period of time, it does seem like unfortunate timing. But the piece that I do agree with is looking to do our field booking, like the cost of booking, in a way that it's not tied to a capital contribution, and that we're just simply charging what our future fee structure is. And so my question is, if we're supporting an extension of this artificial, or of the current agreement, how that would work in terms of collecting some type of user fee from the club, if we're saying that we don't want to move into that system for another 2 years, or if there would be room to look at that and leave the current allocation aside.
With the allocation policy still just getting started with the city of Courtenay, I think the way to look at a 2-year extension here would probably be just considering the ratio of the current contract, which would be $12,500 a year directly to the Comox Valley Soccer Club. So if it's a 2-year agreement, we'd ask them for the $26,000 and probably just leave it at that. And we would be more mindful of their times and work with them harder if other groups wanted on there to really look both at this, have those conversations with the school district and with the club to determine if there was extra room for other user groups. But it would largely be the same agreement with the same ratio of costs would be our recommendation if that's what the commission desired.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. Thanks for that answer. Director Jolicoeur, go ahead.
Yeah, that was one of my questions. Thanks, Chair, for that. I guess the only, not to labor on the policy question that the city is leading, but I would like some clarification from staff if they see a 2-year agreement potentially impacting a future policy and the implementation of that policy, and if we might be in a situation where policy is actually has some tension points or alternative direction than signing a renewed contract that prioritizes the soccer club, and how we might navigate that eventuality.
I think there's been many good comments around the table around looking at outside the traditional user groups. So not speaking on behalf of the city of Courtenay, but I do see this allocation process taking a while to do a fulsome reach out into the community and understanding the true needs of the community, giving the limited space, especially if there's no movement on a second turf field. But most importantly, from that sense, if there is that concern, you could do a 1-year agreement at this time, and then you could give staff the option to renew for 1 year or 2 more years without necessarily coming back to the rec commission in that direction from the board, subject to the allocation policy being completed. So if there is concern there, there's a number of different ways we could slice the agreement to reach that point. But I think a 1-year agreement is definitely well within the window of the expectations that the reality of implementing an allocation policy likely wouldn't be before September 2025 at best. Thanks for that. Director Brown.
Thank you. And thanks for all the comments. Again, we're not part of the service. I'm not going to vote for this, but I am feeling the tension of the privilege that the soccer club has been given. And it's very likely that the privilege we've given them has allowed them to build up their membership and the impact they have and the fundraising and all of that over 10 years and even prior to that. So by extending the agreement and continuing that inequity, we're just embedding it in our system. So the shorter term and getting to an equitable allocation of field time, I think, is really important for us.
Thanks for that. Director Hardy.
Yeah, thanks. Again, going back to a key priority for the Comox Valley Regional District is accessibility, equity, and diversity. And I think if we're going to turn around and come up with a new recommendation that goes against that, whether it's for a year or 2 years or 5 years or 10 years, I think we really need to take a step back and reconsider what's being suggested here in this new recommendation. If we're going to go with this new recommendation, I'll be going against it. Thanks.
Thanks for sharing your thoughts on that. Director Kerr.
I'm finding some of the language that we're using as a group today interesting. I think I don't see anything that goes against the philosophy of inclusion and equity in this recommendation. I think the point is we need to build a second field to include as many people as possible. And in the meantime, the group that is using this field the most and contributed towards its actually being built, has the opportunity to continue to use it without adjusting their programming. I also, with respect, Mayor Brown, I don't think privilege is the right word. I think it's close, but not quite there. Soccer is a really popular sport. I think that's the point. Tons of kids play soccer. Tons of adults play soccer. It's just growing like crazy across Canada. I don't think the coaches and directors and organizers are feeling privileged. They're just dealing with like registrations coming in hand over fist. So it's a very accessible, popular sport. You need a pair of shoes, maybe cleats and a ball, and you go out and play. And I think it's a great, again, my kids don't play soccer. They used to when they were little tots, but just seeing the growth of that sport here locally and across Canada is really great for our community. So it's not privilege, it's popular. It's not lack of equity, or accessibility. It's let's build another field and more people can play of all different sports. And in the meantime, let's not hamstring a super popular, pun intended, hamstring a super popular program and club, while we also allow other community groups to have that discussion. I love, Doug, what you said about maybe that discussion does happen. Maybe field hockey can have a little bit more time and other groups can have some more time. I don't think the soccer club would be completely against that as well as we move towards this second field. Thanks.
Thanks for that. And Director Hardy.
Yeah, thanks. And I guess I'm gonna be a little bit different towards Director Kerr's comments with regards to there wasn't any concerns or issues revolving around accessibility. I think inequity and diversity. It was clearly articulated by one of the directors at the table here earlier with regards to other interest groups, already having no access to or very little access to the turf field, and let's maintain the status quo, and these other interest groups can continue to exercise their programs without the artificial field. So I would disagree with what Director Kerr had mentioned of that. There isn't any discrepancy or conflict with other interest groups and their ability to get on that field right now. And I guess that's the issue that's coming up here is the other groups, that other interest groups that may have an interest in getting on that field. If we maintain the status quo, they're still not going to get access to that field. So again, going back to the priority of the Comox Valley Regional District with regards to accessibility, equity, and diversity, I think we need to support that. And if we go on with extending this agreement for another 2 years or 5 years or 10 years or even 6 months, it goes against the priority of the Comox Valley Regional District, in my opinion. And that's why I'll be voting against it. Don't get me wrong. I grew up playing soccer. I love playing soccer. And I love going to the pitch every Sunday to watch kids play soccer. But I've also over the years seen kids play soccer in behind Rob Road Elementary, the rec field at Comox, up at Highlands. There's a number of different soccer facilities within the Comox Valley that I don't see are being utilized to what they could be right now. And to me, that's where youth programs could be going on. And I'll just leave it at that. Thanks.
Thanks for sharing your thoughts on this, and I appreciate you expressing why you're not supporting the alternate recommendation. One question I wanted to ask of staff, because it is mentioned in the report that given that the club is the largest user group, that there wouldn't have necessarily been a major change in the allocation, even with the ending of the user group and or the user agreement. And I just wanted some clarity on that as well, because I mean, there are a number of groups that would perhaps like access to it, but even looking at a different framework, would that necessarily, if it's a small group and currently we're getting 200 youth on the field in an evening through soccer and another group is small, would there even be an opportunity under a different structure that we would see these kind of smaller groups being able to access the facility, even with a different lens? Sorry, I'll turn your.
Thank you for the question. So it would really depend on a few things, their numbers, their age, and the guidelines for their long-term athlete development models. So if you have one group of, say, 5-year-olds that only need 1/2 hour practice a week, we might be carving that out for, say, lacrosse. But if the soccer club had 400 kids that all needed 1 hour of practice a week, because say they're U5, U6, then we need to allocate that appropriately. So soccer would still have the lion's share, but we may be carving out little pieces for some of the other groups. We're looking at carving out some time on the shoulder seasons as well. So it's hard to know exactly until that allocation policy is done and we really examine that more.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that. That's helpful. Okay, I see no other lights on, so I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? And any opposed? We have Hardy opposed and Shelley Kerr opposed as well. Thanks everyone for the discussion. That was okay. Yeah, sure. We're just gonna amend the or adjust the order of our items to make sure that we can cover our decarbonization strategy, because we have our consultants here to present, and then if time allows, we'll go back to item 2. So I'm looking for a motion for receipt on the decarbonization strategy and roadmap. Moved by Kerr, seconded by Brown, and I'll pass it over to staff.
Great, thanks. And Trish Morgan again will be introducing the presenters as part of the decarbonization strategy and roadmap. Trish.
Thank you. So we have 2 representatives from Focal Engineering. We have Angie, and I'm going to say your last name wrong, Bolo, and Susan McDougall. And we have also Trace from M3 Mechanical and Elise from HCMA. And then I think we may have someone from Advocates, who is our quantity surveyor, also on Zoom. I'll let you introduce your team a little bit more.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Great. Thank you for having us today, to the chair, to the directors, to all the staff. As Trish said, my name is Susan McDougall. I'm a principal at Focal Engineering, and I'm here with Angie, our lead engineer on the project. Elise from HCMA Architecture, who contributed to the architecture and envelope side of things. Trace, who's from M3 Mechanical and contributed to the mechanical side of things. And yes, Margarita Payne from Advocates Consulting is on the line. They're professional quantity surveyors, and so they helped us in the cost development for this study. Thank you too for choosing our team. We're all island locals. We all have young kids. We really believe in the importance of this decarbonization strategy. So we're really thrilled that you are working with us and that we get to present these results to you today. We really see the importance of this work. Okay, so we know that everyone has received and no doubt read in great detail our lengthy report. So we know it was a long report. What we want to do today is really provide you with a project overview and sort of the key pieces, really those key messages that we're hoping you're able to walk away with. And of course, answer any questions you may have and really have a fulsome discussion with you. So we'll start with a brief project overview. Then we'll get into the existing building energy use and really set the scene for where you're at today. We then want to get into what we're calling ECM analysis, energy and emissions conservation measures, because we're really looking at this from a twofold perspective. Within that, we want to talk about the facility expansion and decommissioning opportunities that we heard you discussing earlier with the potential new pool and a new arena. We also looked into district energy considerations, as we know that that's really top of mind for you. So we are going to talk through some of that. And finally, we'll pull it all together into a decarbonization pathway with our recommendations to you. And then we've left some time for questions. Oh, this is not a touchscreen. Okay, so as you know, the scope for the study were the 2 major recreation facilities here in the Comox Valley, the Aquatic Center, or CVAC, and the Sports Center, or you'll see us referring to it in its abbreviated form as the CVSC. And our task under the study was to prepare for you a roadmap to achieve your GHG emissions goals. So these goals were established by your larger SEEP, which looked at the 2019 emissions levels for your entire community portfolio, with the goal of reducing those emissions by 50% over 2019 levels, by 2030, and then a 90% reduction over 2019 levels by 2050. Now, we understand that these two buildings actually form quite a large portion of your overall portfolio emissions. So for these facilities, we actually aimed higher than that 90% with our decarbonization plan. And so that's why we were targeting the 95% emissions reductions for these two buildings. So that's what you're going to see throughout the report. As we kind of touched on in the introduction, we also assessed opportunities and impacts for district energy, potentially decommissioning the pool at the sports center, building a new net zero pool at the aquatic center, and a net zero arena at the sports center. Oh, does that work? Perfect. Thank you. So this is the methodology that we took in our approach. We started out with a large scale background and site review. We came to site, actually met in here several months ago to really get an understanding of those existing facilities and where energy is currently being used the most and where emissions are currently being produced the most. Then we identified and analyzed these energy and emissions measures. We took those into facility planning considerations. So how did we decide which measures to move forward with? The measures could be infinite for any real building, but we wanted to choose ones that were have technology that's available today, that's reliable, that people know how to install and maintain on the island. And we wanted to also try to come up with, cost-effective measures. So not that pie in the sky sort of technology that would be great, but is probably not that affordable. We also looked at things like end-of-life scenarios. We worked closely with your team who knows their buildings really well, and we're able to identify for us, this is reaching end of life, this one's kind of just chugging along, and we really need to be replacing it soon. So we tried to take all those factors into consideration, as well as in that top right corner, the district energy, we looked at that piece as well and kind of weighed that against some of the potential measures and put all of that together into the decarbonization plan. So my last slide is to give you just a kind of a sneak peek at the decarbonization plan. Andy's going to go into a lot more detail on the methodology that we use and some of the measures. Not too much detail because we know that there's only so limited time. But I want to give you the sneak peek so that while she's talking, you can kind of keep that end goal in mind of where we're going with all this. So first of all, from today to 2050, we are in 26 years, 27 if you include 2024. So what we did was really break it down into stages. And we've got these 4 stages highlighted here in the circles. The high priority measures need to really occur between now and 2029. Those are going to be the ones that, first of all, are going to have are the sort of the low hanging fruit. And that's getting a lot of things off natural gas. Those are also going to be the measures that are really important to meet your 2030 target. So that's kind of what's shown underneath that circle there. Electrification items, doing an electrical capacity study. It's going to be important to understand how much it might cost if electrical supply to those facilities needs to be increased. Then we move into the medium priority. This was where we looked at potential impacts of if you do go forward with facility expansions. We're continuing to electrify where necessary. We looked at installing renewables. Oftentimes those that come at the end of a plan, but we move them up because there's actual, really good savings that can be seen from installing renewables earlier. I have them on my house. It's actually really great to see the emissions coming down when you have those there. And one thing that we've also kind of tied in throughout our whole plan is sub-metering. So when we put new equipment in, let's just make sure we're actually checking what that new unit is going to use so that when someone's standing here in 10 years time, they can give you actual data and kind of that feedback at much more level of detail. The third phase is moving into the long term. So we're kind of electrifying anything remaining and really sort of starting to fine tune those buildings. And then that last phase, we're really recommending sort of continuous optimization. By that time, you should have most of your major equipment metered, so you can make some really good decisions about what needs to be done to reduce now the electrical load at those facilities, because you'll have pretty much entirely electrical facilities by then. So the result of this plan is that your emissions should hopefully go from around 1,000, I think it's 964 tons per year is what's currently emitted, down to 44 tons per year. So that's a 95% reduction by 2050. So that meets the goal. And then, of course, what does this cost? You're going to see three sets of costs throughout this report and presentation. The first one is we looked at like-for-like replacement costs. So if you took that one piece of equipment, just replaced it with the exact same size, efficiency today, that's the like-for-like replacement cost. And then we have our proposed equipment cost. That's the energy efficient one that we're proposing, or the electric version perhaps. And then the difference between the two is the incremental cost. And that's really the focus, because some of this equipment, everything's going to reach end of life one day. And so that's the number that we've got shown up here on your screen, is the incremental cost for all of those proposed measures over your like-for-like replacements is $7.6 million. And that's in today's dollars. Now, of course, you're not going to get everything done today. So we do have some escalation shown later in the presentation, but that's just to give you that kind of one number to start with. And we will get into this in a little bit more detail, but of that 7.6 million, 3.7 is just for roof upgrades, which we included them in there because they're reaching their end of life. But they are something that aren't necessarily a priority just for decarbonization. So they may be something you can talk about a little bit more, but we just wanted to kind of flag those bits for you. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about where the buildings are today and how they're performing. So here we can see the aquatic center. So this is the 2022, 2023, 12 months of utility data that we were looking at. And so the aquatic center's got 593 tons of CO2 emitted annually, and the sports center is 354. So I think the first thing you notice there is, even though the aquatic center is a smaller footprint, it's got a much higher emissions profile compared to the sports center, and that's because of most of the heating there being, well, actually all of the heating being driven by gas. Sports center has a bit more of a mixed uses with gas and electric fired equipment. So as we kind of move down, we can look at this energy use intensity, which looks at total energy use in the building and divides it by square meters, so the unit of area, and then we can kind of start to compare these facilities to other facilities in BC. So when we look at that, we can see that the sports center has an energy use intensity of 456. When we look at the median for arenas and rinks, we're looking at 416. And so it's, it's relatively close to that average mark. And the aquatic center is quite a bit higher at 1270. And so while it's not the worst performing aquatic center in BC, it is on the higher end of that scale for rec centers. And yeah, just as Susan mentioned, we've got the 2030 and 2050 targets here at the bottom that we're aiming for. And if we look at the 2030 target of 482 tons of CO2, you can see that even if the sports center was completely carbon neutral, you still wouldn't be at the 2030 target. So it gives you a little bit of a sense as to the deep retrofits that are required here to meet these goals. All right, so as part of this process, we developed energy models for each building, and that helps to analyze the energy use throughout the year with different end users. And so the orange here is natural gas usage, and the blue is electricity. And then we can kind of see where the breakdown is between the different energy end uses. For the aquatic center, as I mentioned, primarily gas driven there. So when we look at
the pool heating, the service water heating or domestic water heating, and then also just space heating, that contributes to that section of gas. While looking at this, there is that electrical portion, but here in BC, our electrical emissions factors are different for electricity and natural gas. And so electricity is considered to be 16 times less emissions emitted than gas. So the emissions profile is a little bit different than this energy breakdown. And so when we look at it, even though gas only accounts for 72% of the overall energy use, it accounts for 98% of the emissions from the aquatic center. So similarly, we did the same breakdown for the sports center. And here, obviously, you can see a lot more blue, a lot more electricity use, less gas use. However, even though the gas, accounts for less than half of the energy used, it accounts for 92% of the emissions from the facility. So when we start to look at, what measures are we going to do to reduce carbon emissions, this really helps to narrow down, where those high impact measures are going to come in. And not to say that, improving efficiencies of electrically fueled or electrically fired equipment is not important, because that has other benefits. It helps with utility bills, and it also helps to reduce the overall electrical service requirements of a building. So there's other benefits there as well. But in terms of emissions, the gas has the biggest impact. All right, so as I mentioned, we looked at each building. We looked at the mechanical, electrical, and envelope systems of the building to see where opportunities to save energy, to reduce emissions. And we also looked at energy systems, so things like photovoltaic panels, and then also district energy opportunities, and kind of tried to have a holistic view of where all the opportunities exist. We identified 89 measures between the two buildings, and then narrowed those down based on prioritizing equipment that was nearing end of life, equipment that was anticipated to have a high impact for emissions, and also items that would help to offset electrical load increases. So these priority measures were used, were modeled in the energy model to get a better sense of what the impact of each measure would be. Based on that, we found 19 measures that we recommend to be pursued, as well as some continuous optimization strategies to help to align with those 2030 and 2050 emissions goals. I'm going to go through in a little bit of detail just some of the ECM, the EECM energy and emissions conservation measures, the specific items that we looked at. I'll touch on this roof one, and then I'll just talk about some of the other measures in general, just so that you can have a sense as you're going through the report of the information that's being presented. So this roof consideration is kind of one that stood out among all of the others. In terms of emissions impact, it's lower than most of the measures studied. However, it's an opportune moment the roof is in need of replacement at both facilities. And so it's an opportune moment to kind of consider whether that can be upgraded. The cost to replace it, like for like, is the first one there. So the two facilities combined, we're looking at about 2.9 million or 3 million. And I think it's important to understand that this like for like cost is based on what is being considered in the asset management plan. So it's really just the membrane. There's no additional replacement there in case, if things are damaged below, which given the age of the roof, it's likely that at least some level of repair will be needed. And it may just be spots, but it's hard to really identify that without doing without taking that membrane off. So we've recommended an upgraded roof, which would improve which would increase the insulation and would also improve the air barrier there. And this, yeah, helps with reducing the emissions. It's not required to meet the 2030 goals. However, given the requirement that the roof needs to be replaced sooner than 2030, or at least sections of the roof would need that, we've included it sooner, and it contributes to that 2050 goal. I think there is an opportunity here to perhaps do some more assessment and determine, is that like for like cost? Is it possible that that's actually, closer to our upgraded cost? Probably not. I'm sure there's still a significant difference there, but something worth investigating a little bit more to refine that and get a sense as to what repair might be needed and other elements there. There's other benefits to replacing the roof and upgrading it. By doing a more thorough upgrade, you're improving the thermal bridges. So the energy efficiency component there. It also gives an opportunity to improve the structure for solar panels that may be added in the future and mechanical equipment that has heat pumps and other things which are heavier than traditional equipment. If the roof isn't pursued, or the roof upgrade isn't pursued, then there are other things that can be considered to make up for those emissions before 2050. Listed a few of those there. Okay. We'll go into, maybe I'll go back here a couple slides and we'll just touch base on, so just to go through, as you're going through the report, you'll see the different energy and emissions conservation measures. There's a table in the report. I believe it's table 12 for the aquatic center and table 13 for the sports center. And it identifies the electricity savings or increase related to a measure, the gas use reduction or increase, well, there's no increases, but reduction related to a measure, and then the emission savings as well related to them. It also goes through the incremental cost, the like for like, and the total capital expected. It looks at savings, both the energy and demand savings related to the utility use, and then also the internal carbon price savings. And so you don't have it, you're in front of it there, or you don't have it in front of you there. So it's a little bit difficult, but if we look at AC1, which is the main air handling unit at the aquatic center, when we look at that unit alone, replacing it with an electric option. So we've looked at a hydronic unit, which will have heat recovery incorporated into it. It'll be heated by an air source heat pump with backup coming from an electric boiler. And we see an electricity use of 18%, a gas use reduction of 38%, and an emissions reduction of 237 tons annually. So even that one upgrade alone has a very significant impact. The incremental cost, so again, that's the cost beyond what you would pay for replacement of an equivalent is about 19,000. That's in 2024 dollars. And the total annual savings, again in 2024 dollars, including that carbon cost savings as well, is over 35,000. So that's one of the high impact measures, but it just gives you a sense of kind of what those values are and what information can be pulled from that. So now we'll jump ahead to this other piece where we really looked at these other considerations that are happening. There's the potential to decommission the pool at the sports center, adding a new net zero pool at the aquatic center, adding a new net zero arena at the sports center. And we wanted to make sure that we included those in this plan to see how does that play into this whole pathway. One thing that we noted is that these facilities really do need to be net zero, which is 90% or more of their own energy being generated on site. There's really, as you can see, it's already a challenge to meet those 2030 and 2050 goals. And so, I think anything else that's added needs to be kind of coming in without hindering that goal. Locating arenas and aquatic facilities together has a very synergistic relationship. We'll talk about a little bit more in the next slide. But arenas have a lot of heat to expel. Pools require a lot of heat, so they have a really good relationship from an energy perspective. And the other piece to consider here is there's also embodied carbon. And while the study focused primarily on operational carbon, it is something worth considering because specifically aquatic centers use a lot of concrete. Concrete has a lot of embodied carbon associated with the material itself. So it is something, you know, when looking at expanding, just another angle to look at. As I mentioned, arenas and pools work really well together. Currently at the Sports Center, Arena 1 has a heat reclaim system, which takes the waste heat from the ice and uses it to heat the Sports Center pool. It also uses it for space heating and some domestic water heating as well. This is, really good relationship. It's really beneficial from an energy perspective to have them on the same site. However, we understand that there is some consideration to decommission that pool and build a new pool at the aquatic center. So we wanted to kind of look from a district energy perspective at the sports center. What are the opportunities to potentially use that excess heat in other ways? So if we retain the pool at the sports center, the potential for district energy isn't really there unless we add Arena 3, which is that potential new arena, and we add a heat reclaim system there. If the pool is decommissioned, then even adding a heat reclaim system to Arena 2 provides an opportunity for a significant amount of excess heat to be available. And adding Arena 3 with heat reclaim would just bolster that case. So in the best or in the most the situation where you'd have the most excess energy, I'll say, is obviously where we've got Arena 2 and 3 with heat reclaim as well. And if there's no pool there, there's about enough energy. It would be about the equivalent amount of half of the sports center's annual energy use is how much energy annually you'd have to access there. So that could be used to, heat the high school nearby. There's, perhaps other facilities nearby that could use that energy as well. And if offsetting gas, then there's the potential of, 377 tons of CO2 emissions at adjacent facilities to be offset. So while that's not offsetting emissions on site, there obviously is a net environmental benefit there. It's always, typically it's easier to use energy in-house. So having the pool there has been a really good energy relationship, as I mentioned. And so, but of course, if facilities change, then there's other opportunities to explore. As Susan mentioned, we looked at all of this information. We put it into a roadmap and kind of looked at how do we break this down into different stages. And so we've got that high priority, medium priority, long-term, and continuous optimization. I won't go into this one in too much detail. I think Susan did a good job kind of giving you that sneak peek, but really the key piece from the high priority phase is that aquatic center electrification, sports center getting set up and started on electrification. So that includes putting in a heat reclaim system for Arena 2 and starting to replace some of the air handling units with hydronic units instead of gas. The aquatic center, it's replacing the pool water heating and the air handling units with electric alternatives. Medium priority is continuing that electrification and continuing in both of these phases, continuing to put sub-meters in so you have that granular data and can make a little bit better informed daily operational decisions as well as long-term decisions about where energy is being used and where efficiencies might be able to be had. In the long term, we're looking at electrifying the backup and refill water heaters at the aquatic center. And then finally, in the continuous optimization piece, looking at those smaller projects, recalibrating controls, recommissioning, exhaust fans, pumps, all of these smaller efficiency projects. When we look at the emissions related to this plan and the implementation, we've got this red line here, which kind of shows you the proposed pathway emissions over time. If we look at the business as usual, that's the yellow line along the top. And you can kind of see how as measures are implemented, we meet that 2030 target of 482 tons and then that 2050 target later on. Something that is important to point out here is just that doing the high impact measures earlier on not only does it have a big annual emissions reduction, but it also has a lifetime emissions. So when we look at this as like a 26 or a 27-year term, doing those things earlier, it costs less, you have less of the effects of escalation, and you also get to save those lifetime emissions. All right, and here's kind of what it all comes down to in terms of costs and savings. So I'll just look at the overall capital cost is including escalation based on the timeline that we've implemented. And these are escalation estimates, so it's 19 million. And then of that, just over 10 million is the incremental cost. So beyond what you would need to replace these units with anyway, we're looking at an additional 10 million. Over the same period, when we look at utility savings and carbon cost savings, we're just over 9 million. So you can see that as time goes on, those numbers, the savings and the incremental costs, that gap does close between the two numbers or get closer. And yeah, just to, I guess, wrap it up is, I think it's a really good news story that like these emissions targets are, they're really aggressive, and it can be done with trusted technologies. These are not experimental technologies that carry a lot of risk with them. These are technologies that are being implemented all over. And the projects that have already been completed in the last couple of years and that are already underway for this year are really in line with what is being recommended. And so you're already kind of moving in that direction, and it's great to see that this can just kind of move forward without any major changes. The next steps are really the electrical capacity piece, understanding the costs associated with electrical service upgrades if required, and then looking into refining that roof piece a little bit more, as that's kind of the more significant measure for cost. And then, getting into the detailed design and starting to get moving on the upgrades. Of course, 2030 is coming quickly. And so, yeah, it's a really exciting time. The facilities are really at a really good time to make these big investments and shift to low carbon options. And yeah, just leave it at that. And if there's any questions.
Thanks so much for this presentation and such a thorough breakdown of the report. And I'm in agreement. There's a lot of good information and good news in here. And it's encouraging to see that we can decide to go on a path that can have such a drastic improvement on our carbon emissions. So thanks for that. And I'll pass it to Director Kerr.
Thanks for the report. A couple of comments and then a question. First of all, I'd just say that I was actually quite surprised by how doable it actually is. I was kind of nervous to see this report coming, expecting some like $50 million number or something, but the fact that the incremental costs are not that much higher, relatively speaking, than the replacement costs that would have to be done anyway. It's very encouraging. So thank you. I really also appreciated in the appendix, page 43, the year-by-year breakdown of your recommendations. I think that's really clear and well laid out. My question is, I found it really neat, the technology around how the pools and rinks interplay with each other. Was there any thought about if we were to build a third rink, putting it beside, space aside, I don't even know if there's space, but putting it beside the current larger pool, the aquatic center, would that have a more synergistic effect than putting a third rink where it is currently, the other two rinks are, since we're decommissioning the pool, possibly?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there would be the it's like I said, it's typically better to use the energy in-house. It's just logistically easier and doesn't require as much equipment. You don't have the losses of, transporting it to a nearby facility. And so, yeah, if there's an opportunity to put an arena near the existing aquatic center, I think that would be, it would have a huge benefit. You wouldn't have the losses of sending it. If you had a sports center, you'll have to use that heat at, the high school or some other facility nearby. And so there's some losses associated with it. And so if you can use it directly, then there's a benefit there.
Thanks for that answer. Oh, I see. Director Hillian has his light on.
Thanks very much. I was just curious, I couldn't find it in the report. You mentioned that our facilities were somewhat behind facilities in other communities. And just quickly, what are the major factors that are causing that? And related to that, what are other communities doing by comparison in relation to reducing greenhouse gas emissions? It's always good to know where we're at in that whole process relative to other communities that you might have worked with.
Yeah, I don't think you're necessarily behind. I think that aquatic facilities just happen, they just are high energy users, and they tend to be gas fired traditionally. And so there's just that shift happening to electrify more of that equipment that's used to heat the water and the space. But I think that it's just a high energy use facility. And so the aquatic centers, the study that we reference is a PUMA study, and it's just BC facilities. So it is somewhat limited. But yeah, I think aquatic facilities tend to be on the higher end of that. To use less energy there, I think having the rink and aquatic facilities, that's probably one of the number one things that brings that down. And that's probably why the sports center is more around average. Is because it's taking that excess heat and it's dumping it to the pool rather than needing to use gas-fired equipment to heat the pool. I would say that's probably the number one thing. Is there anything else to mind?
Yeah, that study that you're referencing is in the existing building section. If you go to slide, you can't go back.
I can go back.
It's on slide 6, but basically they provided emissions and energy information for 20 facilities across BC. And we were able to pull out the ones that had rinks in them because they specified that clearly. We were not able to identify which ones had pools in them. So we just used the average across all. So it's possible that some of those just are like more clubhouses, more, multi-purpose rooms, office space, that kind of thing. But we just don't have the information on that. But that's all we had to compare to basically, so.
Okay, and the second part was, is this going on in other communities? Are they going through the same processes as we are?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a big, I think there's a big push. Rec centers are very process driven with their energy loads, and so they tend to be higher emitters than other building types. So there is a big push. We've got other projects. There's a lot of incentive programs as well as a result of that.
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks very much.
Yeah, we have some incentive programs in the report.
Well, thanks for that information. We're going to try and run through the questions relatively quickly because we only have 15 minutes left in our time slot here. I'll go to Zoom, and Director Jolicoeur, go ahead, please.
Yeah, hi, and thanks for the presentation. In the report, it speaks to, I think it's the second phase after 2029, having the new facilities come on boarded, and the analysis included those 2 new facilities coming online in 2030. And I'm just curious with the cost estimates for that section, that does not include the cost for those new assets. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, it includes the energy. We've assumed that they're 90% self-generating for energy, but there is like a 10% energy use that we've included in the emissions pathway, but not the overall capital cost for the facilities.
Right. And so just as a follow-up to that, do we know, and this might be more of a question for staff, when we received And when we considered all of the capital projects for the commission that included the new aquatic center and a new pool, those estimates that we got for the costs, beyond the fact that they were 2022 numbers or 2023 numbers, did they include the recommended energy efficiencies that are found in this report? Or that would we consider those to be in addition, those costs to be in addition to those estimates at that time?
Through the chair to the director. So those were extremely high level costs. They weren't developed based on a concept, or it was a very, very loose concept. So those would be additional costs. And as you may recall, we're working on the Arena 3 feasibility study now. And so we'll have better cost estimates. And HCMA worked on this project and they're working on our Arena 3 project as well. So there is that synergistic relationship where we're looking at net zero buildings. So we'll have a much better idea of the arena in July. And then there's still work to be done on the pool side because that hasn't been slated in our work plan until 2025, if the commission wants to move forward with that.
Thanks. Happy to hear that they're going to be included in the arena. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks for that question. And Director Grant.
Yeah, thanks. I'm just wondering, can you tell me what difference this will make to the carbon emissions in the valley? Like, it's good to know that we're doing all this, but is it gonna make a dent in what we put out in the valley, or?
I wonder if actually that's probably not part of the scope of our consultants, but I do see Mike Bernard here.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Mike might be able to provide some context in relation to the community emissions plan as well.
Yeah, in terms of the community emissions plan, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but they're obviously quite significant. We're just looking at 2 facilities in the entire Comox Valley here. In terms of our overall corporate emissions portfolio from the corporate energy and emissions plan, these recommendations would result in 70%. What is it? Sorry. For the department, it would be a 70% reduction for 2030 and a 40% reduction in our entire corporate emissions. For 2050, it would be a 91% reduction of the entire department and a 54% reduction of our entire corporate emissions portfolio. And I think it's also worth mentioning that these are emissions over which we have control, and we're the only ones who can control them. So, all of the other emissions in the valley are important, and we need to be looking at those, but there are also other actors involved in those. Whereas with these emissions, we're the only ones who can address them.
Yeah, I guess I just like outcomes, and I'd like to know, like, are we really making a big difference here, or is it just going to be an eyedropper in the ocean? That's what I'd like to know.
I think I would say that a lot of this will have better context coming out of the climate action strategy that's in development by long range planning.
Yeah, thanks for providing that question that's maybe slightly out of scope, but well answered. And Director Morin.
Thanks, Chair. Maybe I don't have latitude to piggyback onto a question that's slightly out of scope, but I was just when you say the 54% for this department, but if we add the rest of the things that might come out of the climate action plan in terms of, say, transportation, if we get electric buses and all the other departments, then that would create much bigger reductions overall for the corporation. Like, we're just looking at this one department, basically. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's correct. But I'll let staff answer.
Yeah, we're just looking at one department at the moment, and this would have a 70% reduction by 2030 and a 91% by 2050. Corporate wide, only doing this, but everything else being equal, this would result in a 40% reduction by 2030 and a 54% reduction by 2050.
Thank you. I mean, to me, that is fairly significant, even though it's only one piece of the valley. We do create a lot of emissions as a corporation. So thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that. And just to add, I mean, every action in climate action is incremental. I mean, there are no actions possible that we could take in Canadian society that aren't incremental and granular. So, and we are providing leadership in our region, and we definitely have a responsibility to do what we say is important and lead by example. Director Arbor.
Yeah, thanks. I feel like a bit of a fraud because I just showed up in the meeting, but I did read all the reports, and I'm sorry I couldn't be there at another meeting. But my thought is the same as at EASC. If we can actually show the carbon reduction as, you know, cost per GHG, so to speak, that really helps us make decision, because then we might be able. So that's something in the report that I was starting to get a glimpse of the scale of reductions. But I think the more you show that to the board, the more we'll be able to decide on which is getting the old expression of the best buck, so to speak, for the amounts that we're reducing. So
Yeah, thanks for that comment. And we're pretty much out of time, but I just wanted to ask one thing about I think it was one of the final tables in the presentation around the capital cost and the savings. And from my reading of it, you know, we have the cost of carbon in the table, and then the utility cost as well. And it looks like utility costs maybe go up slightly because I'm assuming electric energy is slightly more expensive than natural gas. But did we take the carbon cost off the natural gas and move it to the carbon column? So we're including the external cost of carbon and our internal cost in that carbon column. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
So
And
the carbon tax and the internal carbon price are
just
included.
very high level, rough estimate, how much of that carbon cost is internal versus external, like over if you know it?
I don't have that offhand, but we can figure that out pretty easily.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. And given that we're out of time, this report is just for receipt for the time being. So I think we had a motion for receipt. We did. So I'll just call the question. Is there anyone opposed? Seeing none, that's carried. And given that we're out of time, I'd like a motion to defer item 2 and item 4 to the next commission meeting. Thank you. Moved by Hillian, seconded by Morin, I believe. Is there anyone opposed to that? Seeing none, that's carried, and I'll just ask for termination.
Thank you.
Thanks.